Master Your Mindset Radio, episode 121.
Welcome to Master Your Mindset Radio, the show where we empower you to discover your true self before the world told you differently. Now for your host, Elizabeth Nader.
Hey friends, I am back. I've been doing a lot of traveling, so I've missed a couple of weeks here, but I am back to talk to you about all things mindset. When I travel, I almost always bring a book with me that I like to just read parts of, just to encourage me and remind me about some really interesting concepts about mindset. So once again, I did that in my last trip, which I returned from today. And this book is Carol Dweck, PhD. It's called Mindset, the New Psychology of Success, How We Can Learn to Fulfill Our Potential. Now, I love this book. It's full of great information, and I would say it's only second to Master Your Mindset, The Master's Way by Elizabeth Nader, if you haven't read that book yet. No, really, I love Carol's stuff. Someday, hopefully, I'll get to meet her because obviously it inspired me. I do want to tell you that I did not find this book until recently, and she just released an updated edition. So I wrote mine before I even knew this existed, but I love everything she has to say. So I just randomly opened it on the plane, and I was in the chapter talking about relationships and mindset. So I decided today I would share some wisdom of Carol through my filter and my own view on mindset and relationships as it relates to marriages or any kind of close relationship like that. Now, if you're not married, don't turn this off because you probably might get married soon or will be in a serious relationship or are, and the same point of view is helpful and the same skill set to develop and the same mindset is helpful. So we're going to talk about two things that are mindset traps when it comes to marriages or serious relationships and how you can actually look at things differently. So the first one is the first trap, the first misnomer when it comes to relationships and mindsets is if you have to work at it, it wasn't meant to be. Now, you hear this once in a while, or it's just a mindset that people will have that this is too hard. We're needing to work at this, therefore it must not be right. Very commonly held mindset. I want to make an analogy to the fixed versus growth mindset because we have done a show on that before, written about it before, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. The fixed mindset says that failure is failure, that if you don't do well at something, if something doesn't work, then you just have to move on. The growth mindset says we learn from this, we improve from this, we keep trying, we use failure as a feedback mechanism. So people that think about relationships, if you have to work at it, it wasn't meant to be, they have a fixed mindset. And unfortunately, that is not going to create a great relationship because obviously you have to work on things. Now, when this comes into play is key. Because if you go on a date with somebody and it's not working on the first, second, third date, this isn't the time to lean in and say, no, we're going to make this work because I have a growth mindset. We, of course, are talking about relationships that have been put together with a good foundation, that have started off with a chemistry and something that's working and then eventually hit some sort of challenge. And it's up to you to decide, is that challenge there to allow us to grow, or is the challenge there because we are not meant to be together? It's not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer to find. That is a difficult situation, but I can tell you that especially when it comes to marriages where you have invested in the marriage for a long time, more likely than not, you need to have a growth mindset and say, all right, let's work at this. But so many people will say and will have that destructive belief that if we need to work at it, there's something seriously wrong with our relationship. But here's the reality. And as Carol says in her book, every marriage demands an effort to keep it on the right track. There is constant tension. That tension is between the forces that hold you together and those that can tear you apart. And I can tell you that it's true, that tension is always there, and you can use that for your benefit. But it's not as though this is a Disney movie where Sleeping Beauty kisses her prince and then they're meant to be, and then nobody has to do anything and there is no failure and you don't have to work at anything and everything is perfect. But the reality is much different than that. And you probably know that, but do you really apply a growth mindset to your relationship? But the idea that there's this constant tension between forces that keep you together and those that tear you apart is probably why so many relationships go stale. Because people have this belief that being in love means never having to do anything taxing, that it's just a Sleeping Beauty Disney movie, right? And I'm not going to say Hollywood, because Hollywood certainly has enough movies out there with difficult relationships. But when you think about the idea that I'm in love, now I don't have to do anything difficult, and if I do, then maybe this is not meant to be. You've got to change your mindset on that. And you have to change it with wisdom. Because what if you are dating someone and you hit a lot of difficulties? You're going to have to do the work to decide, is this still the relationship I want, or do I not want to marry this person? So don't get me wrong. I don't advise that when you hit a speed bump in a dating relationship, you push through it no matter what, because making that decision to marry someone is a lifelong commitment that you don't want to take for granted. So, in a dating relationship, you certainly have the opportunity to figure out whether or not you want to continue to work on something. But once you're married, the hope and the prayer is that you're committed. And therefore, if you have a growth mindset, you will see that when you hit those speed bumps and you have that tension that is threatening to tear you apart or actually hold you together, that you look at it correctly. One of the pitfalls in mindset in marriage is the idea that couples should be able to read each other's minds. So you are one, so your partner should know what you think, what you feel, what you need, and I should know what my partner thinks, feels, needs. Everyone should understand each other because we're one and we're married, but it's not true. And the problem with that is that it's what she calls a low effort belief, is that mindset is wrong. You're not willing to put in the effort, or you're not purposely putting in the effort to understand your spouse because you think that, well, we love each other and we should be able to know what the other partner needs. And I would argue that even though couples who have been married 50 years probably can finish each other's sentences, they would probably not tell you that they always can anticipate their partner's needs. It just doesn't make sense. You're two distinct people. But that mindset is part of the fixed mindset. It's not a growth mindset. It's one that says, I shouldn't have to do any effort. I should automatically understand my partner and they should understand me. And so when there is a misunderstanding or one is not able to read the other's mind, then you start to think, okay, there's a problem, because that fixed mindset thinks that a couple should share all of each other's views, therefore should be able to anticipate each other's needs. Well, that's just not true. That's just simply not true. And if it were true, you wouldn't need communication. You can just assume things. You can assume what the other person needs. You can assume what their views are. Communication is the tool that allows you to interpret and allows you to share and allows you to relate to each other. So low effort relationships are in the fixed mindset, and they say, well, I shouldn't have to work at it. Each of us should know what the other needs. So I think one of the things behind that is this assumption about things in a relationship. And this assumption is dangerous. We cannot assume things. We have to communicate, one of the most important things. Carol says in her book, a no-effort relationship is a doomed relationship, not a great relationship, clearly. It takes work to communicate accurately. It takes work to expose and resolve conflicting hopes and beliefs. It doesn't mean there are no happily lived ever after, right? That's what we all want. They lived happily ever after. But it's more like they worked happily ever after, which I love. I love that. They worked happily ever after. It never ends. It's constant work. But it should always be towards a new goal. You should always set a new goal to improve the relationship. So what's another issue? Let me give you a second issue with the fixed mindset towards marriage. And that is related to it, that problems indicate character flaws. So the first one was really that it shouldn't have to be work, right? And this one is a problems indicate character flaws. Well, that's an issue because if you see a problem with your spouse and you assume then there's a deep-seated flaw, which there may be, but if you think about that, you end up assigning blame. You blame yourselves, you blame your partner, and you blame a trait, a character flaw. And this is a no-win situation. This does not allow for growth in the relationship because when you're blaming each other, you begin to then feel anger and disgust towards them, especially when you have a fixed mindset because you believe if there's a flaw in your partner and things don't change, a fixed mindset says things don't change, then you believe that will never change. That's what you believe. And so when you see those flaws, you can become contemptuous of them, dissatisfied with everything. Rather, if you have a growth mindset, you can see your partner's imperfections, but you can still see that you have a good relationship. It's different. You're seeing failure, if you will, differently, just like any other growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So it's really important that we don't start to see traits and that we think are bad or personality defects, because then we begin to feel this contempt towards the other. And if you have a fixed mindset, you think it's never going to change, but that's not true, is it? It can change. Now, you're probably thinking, all right, when we tell people when they get married, don't assume you're going to change your partner. Don't assume that can happen. And I agree. You shouldn't go into a marriage thinking, all right, I can change this person. That's not the right mindset. But the right mindset is, hey, things change. People change. I can change. They can change. I'm not setting out to change them. I'm setting out to have the best relationship I can have. And that means I'm open to change. And hopefully they're open to change as well. But I can tell you, if you point your finger at someone and accuse them of a personality defect, which is almost telling them that they're bad and that it can't change, believe me, they're not going to want to change that. There's nothing in them that's going to say, gee, I can't wait to make that better for you since you believe in me so much. They will shut down. They will become defensive. They will not want to make changes that they could potentially make. They will simply shut down to you, and the cycle will just continue. So really what happens in that scenario with a fixed mindset is your partner then becomes all of a sudden your adversary. And this is really how people go from this incredible love journey where this person is the light of your life to all of a sudden they're your adversary. And if you've ever watched a couple go through a divorce, it's just hard to imagine how those two that were standing at the altar and so in love with each other, how did they become such mortal enemies? And I think that's what the transformation takes place, because you're failing at all these tasks to keep the marriage together. And you're starting to blame when something goes wrong. You have a fixed mindset and you believe that those faults cannot change, and you believe that failure is imminent, rather than looking at each other and saying, how can we grow from this? And I think the blame game and the taking your corners and all of that is related to a fixed mindset. So the alternative obviously is much better. The alternative is to have a view of your marriage as something that's growing and changing, not as something that needs to be perfect or needs to fit into a certain box or definition. It's something where two people are growing together, two people are working on themselves, and that they believe that each of them can change and will change because they love the other person, not because one is perfect and one is flawed, and not look at it as though, well, if we fail, then that means that it was the wrong relationship. Or if, look at it as though if it's difficult, if I have to work on it, it's not meant to be. And sometimes you go through seasons where one of the partners is willing to work on things a lot more than the others. These are two people that have different cycles in life and different issues in life. And that's going to happen. You're not always going to be in the same place as the other person. But at the end of the day, one thing my husband always says, that was the best advice he ever got from the pastor who married us, was that if you prefer the other person, if you're always preferring the other person, no matter where you are, no matter how difficult things are, even if you just can't stand your spouse or you're just in a really bad place yourself. If you force yourself to prefer the other person, to put them first, and each spouse does that, you can't lose. You can't lose. You're bound to have a growth mindset, and you're bound to be in a position where you're not self-serving, where you're not only looking at things through your circumstances, but looking through the other person's circumstances and putting their preferences first. If each in the marriage put the other first, obviously you can understand that that will be a marriage that will thrive out of the selflessness of doing that. So I hope those are a little few nuggets for you in your marriage, or as you're getting married or nearly getting married, or whatever that is, that you understand mindset has everything to do with success in your marriage. And it has everything to do with the way you see your spouse. And believe me, if you're just getting married now and you're in that whole early stages, you're not always going to feel all those same things you felt when you first got married. But if you do the work and you see the work as an opportunity, you're going to find such a greater reward than you could have imagined when you were in the initial stages of that relationship. But it's hard to explain that to someone who hasn't been there yet. Trust me, it's worth the work. And don't ever expect that work to end. Have the mindset that you are in a continual growth stage. And the more you invest in that relationship, part of the protection of that relationship not being blown apart is because you have each invested a tremendous amount, not only through life's ups and downs, not only through all the life choices you've made together, the things you've gone through, the good things, the bad things, the children, the difficulties, the triumphs. All of that has a way of bonding you closer if you see it all as growth and you don't see it with a fixed mindset. So that is for all those married couples out there today and those about to get married. Have a great week, guys. Think about this. I hope you have fabulous relationships. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Master Your Mindset Radio. Before you go, please visit ElizabethNader.com to learn more about the Mindset Maven and how she is guiding high performers to map their mindset to their message so they can effectively express who they are and why their ideas should win. Looking forward to seeing you online.